The wind was bitter that evening, the kind that cut through layers of clothing and left a sting on bare skin. Sundar Pichai had just finished a long meeting downtown and decided to walk back to his hotel instead of calling a car. He liked moments like this, quiet away from the constant noise of boardrooms and flashing screens. But as he turned a corner near a dimly lit street, his pace slowed. There, under the weak yellow glow of a flickering street lamp, a small figure was sitting on the curb. At first, he thought it was just someone resting, but as he stepped closer, the outline became clearer. It was a girl, maybe 12 or 13, wrapped in a thin, torn sweater. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest, and her arms were shivering so much that even from a distance, it was impossible not to notice. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, but there was something in her posture that caught him. It wasn't just the cold, it was the way she seemed to be holding something inside. Like the world had already asked too much from her. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm, gentle. She lifted her head just enough for him to see her face. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm fine." But it was the kind of "I'm fine" that carried the weight of everything not being fine at all. He noticed her hands, they were bare, and the skin was cracked, almost raw. He glanced down at the thick coat he was wearing. Without thinking too much, he shrugged it off and held it out. To her, "Here, take this. It's too cold to be out here like that." She shook her head at first, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why would you give me that? You don't even know me." Sundar smiled softly. "You don't have to know someone to help them." After a long pause, she reached out slowly, almost like she was afraid he might pull it away. When she slipped her arms into it, the coat looked far too big on her small frame. Still, she pulled it tight around herself, burying her face in the warm collar. For the first time, she let out a small sigh, as if her body had been holding its breath for hours. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then, almost as if she regretted speaking, she looked away. He sat down on the curb beside her. "My name's Sundar," he said. "What's yours?" She hesitated, then said, "Maya." "Maya," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Why are you out here alone?" For a moment, she didn't answer. The street was silent except for the distant sound of traffic. Finally, she murmured, "I'm looking for someone." He tilted his head slightly. "Who?" She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening on the edge of the coat. "My sister. She's all I have left." His brows furrowed. "Where is she?" Maya's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "I don't know, but I have to find her. I promised her I would." The way she said it, like a vow carved deep into her heart, made something tighten in his chest. "How long have you been looking?" he asked. Her eyes flicked up to meet his for just a second. "Days." He could see the exhaustion in her face now, the kind that didn't just come from being tired, but from carrying too much alone. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" "Yes." She shook her head. "I can't stop. If I do, she might get further away. Every minute matters." There was a quiet determination in her tone, but also fear. Sundar knew that kind of fear, or the kind that made you run on empty. Ignoring your own needs because someone else's life felt more important. He didn't want to press her too hard, but he couldn't just leave her here. "Where was the last place you saw her?" He asked. Maya single quotes as eyes darted away, and for the first time, he noticed her hesitation. I can't tell you everything. Not yet." The streetlight above them buzzed and flickered again, casting their shadows long across the pavement. "That's okay," he said gently, "but maybe I can help you look." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was someone she could trust. Finally, she said, "If you want to help, you have to promise me something." He nodded. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "Promise me you won't tell anyone we talked." The request struck him as strange. "Why?" "Not." She bit her lip. "Because if the wrong people find out, they'll stop me, and then I'll never see her again." A cold wind blew through the street, but Sundar barely felt it. Something about this girl's story wasn't adding up, yet every Instinct told him she was telling the truth about the danger before he could ask another question. She stood up abruptly, tightening the coat around her small frame. "I have to go," she said. "Wait," he called after her, standing as well. "Where are you going?" She looked back once, her dark eyes catching the faint light. "To the place where she was last seen," and without another word she turned and began walking quickly down the street, disappearing into the shadows. Sundar stood there for a moment, torn between letting her go and following. Something inside him whispered that this was not just a lost child looking for her sister. This was something much bigger. He took a step forward, then another, until he found himself following her at a distance, and that's when he saw it too. Figures in dark jackets standing across the street, watching her every move. Sundar's steps slowed as he watched the two figures on the other side of the street. Their posture wasn't casual. They weren't just random passers-by. They were locked onto Maya, tracking her like shadows that refused to be shaken off. They didn't move right away, almost as if they wanted her to believe she wasn't being followed. He stayed far enough behind to avoid drawing attention, but close enough that he wouldn't lose sight of her. The street was narrow, flanked by old brick buildings with peeling paint and boarded-up shop fronts. The sound of Maya's hurried footsteps echoed faintly against the walls. She turned down an alley without glancing back. Sundar's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. The two men moved then, slipping from their spot and following her into the alley. He didn't think. He crossed the street, the cold air biting at his face, and stepped into the alley entrance. It smelled faintly of damp concrete and rusted metal. The dim light from the street barely reached here. Maya was halfway down, her shoulders hunched, walking faster now. The two men had closed the distance between them and her. Sundar quickened his pace, his mind racing for the right approach. "Maya!" he called out, his voice echoing off the walls. She froze, startled, and turned her head just as one of the men reached for her arm. "Hey!" Sundar's tone sharpened, carrying enough authority to make them pause. The taller one straightened, looking over his shoulder at him. His eyes narrowed, scanning Sundar from head to toe as if trying to place him. "This isn't your business," he said flatly. "She's a child," Sundar replied, stepping closer. "That makes it my business." The shorter man gave a low chuckle, but it was humorless. "You don't know what you're walking into, friend." Sundar's heart pounded, but his voice stayed even. "Maybe you should tell me then." Maya's gaze darted between them, her breath quick and shallow. She took a step back toward Sundar, but the taller man moved to block her. "Maya," Sundar said gently, "come here." She hesitated, then made a sudden dash toward him. The taller man lunged, but Sundar stepped in his way, forcing the man to stop short. "Touch her," Sundar said, his voice low but dangerous, "and you'll regret it." For a tense moment, the alley was silent except for the faint dripping of water from a pipe overhead. Then the shorter man smirked and tugged at his companion's sleeve. "Not worth it," he muttered. "Let's go." The taller man's eyes stayed locked on Sundar's for a beat too long before he finally stepped back. Without another word, they both retreated down the alley, disappearing into the shadows. Maya's small frame trembled as she clutched the coat tighter around herself. "Who were they?" Sundar asked. She shook her head quickly. "I can't say. If I tell you, they'll find us faster." He crouched slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "Maya, they already found you. And they were close enough to take you if they wanted. You can't keep running like this without help." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've been doing it for days. I can do it a little longer." "You're going to wear yourself down," he said softly. "You're freezing." "You haven't?" "Eaten. You can't help your sister if you collapse." The mention of her sister made her look away. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't stop. Because she's out there, and she's alone. And if they find her first..." She cut herself off. Biting her lip, Sundar realized then that whatever danger her sister was in, it wasn't just a matter of being lost. Someone was actively looking for her and not for anything good. "Maya," he said firmly, "let me help you. Not just for tonight, but until we find her. You can't do this alone." She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes filled with uncertainty. Finally, she gave a tiny nod. Okay, but we have to move now. They might circle back. They left the alley quickly, sticking to well-lit streets. As they walked, she began to speak in small fragments, almost as if each word was carefully chosen to avoid revealing too much. Her sister's name was Anika. She was 16, 2 years older than Maya. They had been together until 4 nights ago, when Anika was taken. Maya didn't say who took her, only that they were people you can't trust, no matter what they promise. They reached a quiet diner on the corner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Sundar guided her inside, the warm air wrapping around them as the door shut. The waitress gave them a curious glance, but said nothing as they slid into a booth. Asterisk. Maya kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting the 2 men to appear at any second. Sundar ordered her something hot to eat, and when the plate arrived, she ate quickly but neatly, as if she had learned to make food last. When she was halfway through, he asked, "Do you know where they might have taken Anika?" She froze mid-bite, then slowly set her fork down. "I think so," she said quietly. "But it's dangerous. Even for you." "Tell me," Sundar urged. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's an old warehouse by the docks. People go in, but they don't come out." His stomach tightened. "Maya, if that's where she is." "It is," she interrupted. "And I'm going there tonight." He stared at her, realizing she meant every word. "You're not going there alone." She met his gaze with a stubborn determination far beyond her years. "Then you'd better keep up." And just like that, she slid out of the booth. Pulling the coat tighter, Sundar followed her outside into the cold night. But the moment they stepped into the street, he saw them again, those same 2 men, standing. At the corner, waiting. Asterisk, the cold air seemed sharper now, the night heavier. Sundar's eyes locked on the 2 men standing at the corner. They weren't pretending anymore. Their posture made it clear they were waiting, and they weren't trying to hide it. One leaned casually against the lamppost, hands in his pockets, while the other stood a few feet away, scanning the street like a predator watching for movement. Maya stopped in her tracks, her small fingers tightening around the sleeve of Sundar's shirt. He could feel her hand trembling through the fabric. "It's them again," she whispered, her voice so small it nearly got lost in the noise of passing cars. "Keep walking," Sundar murmured, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Don't look at them. Just stay close." They moved together, heading in the opposite direction. Sundar's mind worked quickly, mapping out the streets in his head. He didn't want to lead her somewhere crowded, where the men could corner them without witnesses. But he also couldn't head straight to the warehouse, not with them tailing this closely. He glanced at the diner behind them. The warm glow of the windows was already far away, and the safety of that booth felt like a memory. "Are they following?" Maya asked without turning her head. He risked a quick look over his shoulder. Yes, they had left the corner and were walking at a steady pace, closing the gap inch by inch. "Yes," he said quietly. "But we'll lose them." He took a sharp turn down a side street lined with shuttered storefronts and old street art peeling off brick walls. The air smelled faintly of oil and damp paper. Maya kept pace, her sneakers barely making a sound. Against the cracked pavement, another turn. This time into an alley that opened into a small back courtyard surrounded by chain-link fences. Sundar scanned quickly for exits, 2 gates, one on the far side leading to another street. He guided Maya toward it, but as they reached the gate, the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. The men had cut through another alley, finding a faster route. The taller one called out, "Maya, you're making this harder than it needs to be." She froze mid-step, her shoulders stiffening. Sundar turned to face them, positioning himself between her and them. "She's not going anywhere with you," Sundar said, his voice low and unwavering. The shorter man smirked. "This doesn't involve you. Hand her over and you can walk away without trouble." Maya's voice cracked when she spoke, but the words carried a sharp edge. "I told you to stay away from me." The taller man sighed as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. "Maya, your sister's already with us. You're just making it harder on yourself." Sundar felt the jolt run through him. He glanced at Maya. Her eyes went wide, a flicker of fear and disbelief flashing across her face. "You're lying," she shot back. "If she was with you, she would have found a way to tell me." "She doesn't have that option," the shorter one replied smoothly. Sundar realized the conversation was a tactic. They were trying to wear her down, to make her doubt her own instincts. "We're done talking," Sundar said. The taller man's jaw tightened. "So you want this the hard way." Before they could take another step, Sundar grabbed Maya's hand. "Run," he whispered, and they bolted toward the far gate. He shoved it open with his shoulder, the rusty hinges screaming in protest, and they spilled onto the next street. The night became a blur of footsteps, distant shouts, and the cold burning in his lungs. They weaved through streets until the sound of pursuit faded, replaced by the low hum of a freight train somewhere in the distance. Finally, they stopped near an overpass, both gasping for breath. Sundar leaned against the concrete wall, scanning the area. Maya pressed her back against the wall, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with something more than fear, anger. "They know where she is," Sundar said, catching his breath. "And that means we can't wait until morning. If she's in danger, tonight might be the only chance to get her out." Maya nodded, but her voice was firm. "I told you the warehouse by the docks. They're keeping her there. I had been trying to get clothes, but they've been watching me since the night she was taken." Sundar frowned. "Why would they take her? What do they want?" Maya hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Because she knows something? Something she's not supposed to. I don't even know all of it. But she overheard them talking about something big, something they're planning, and they realized she heard." "Maya," Sundar said slowly, "do you know what it is there? Planning?" She shook her head. "All she told me before they grabbed her was that it wasn't just about money. It was bigger and dangerous." The low rumble of the freight train grew louder as it passed in the distance, the sound echoing under the overpass. Sundar knew they couldn't linger. "We'll go to the warehouse," he said. "But we need a plan. Rushing in will only get us both caught." Maya looked up at him, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized coat, but her voice steady. "Then we make a plan now. Because if we wait too long, we might lose her forever." They moved quickly through the streets, heading toward the waterfront. The air grew colder and damp with the smell of the sea. The closer they got, the more deserted the streets became, rows of shipping containers stacked high, cranes looming, like silent giants above them. Finally, they reached a stretch of cracked pavement leading to a cluster of abandoned buildings. In the distance, Sundar spotted it, the warehouse. It was larger than he expected, its metal siding weathered and streaked with rust. A few dim lights glowing from inside. Maya stopped and pointed. "That's it." Sundar studied it carefully. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with coiled razor wire. A single gate stood slightly ajar, but a security camera hung above it. "We can't just walk in," Sundar said. "They'll see us before we get close." Maya's eyes flickered toward a narrow side alley between two smaller buildings. "There's another way. I have been here before, but I never made it past the fence." Sundar followed her into the alley, where the shadows were thicker, the air heavy with the smell of salt and rust. At the far end, a section of fence leaned at an angle, its bottom half bent outward. Maya crouched and slipped through first. Sundar followed, the cold metal scraping his shoulder. They moved silently across the yard, keeping low, weaving between piles of crates and barrels. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from inside the warehouse. As they reached a side door, Maya froze, her breath hitching. Sundar followed her gaze and saw her sister and Ik stood in the glow of a single light inside, her wrist bound, a man standing just a few feet from her. But before Sundar could react, he noticed something else. The man wasn't one of the two who had been following them. And he wasn't alone. There were at least 6 others inside, and they were all armed. The sight of Anika hit Maya like a physical blow. Sundar felt the girl's hand clutch at his arm, her small fingers digging into his sleeve as if holding on for balance. For a moment, Maya forgot to breathe. Her sister was there, just a few meters away. But the glassy-eyed fear in Anika's face made it clear this wasn't a simple rescue. Inside the warehouse, the dim yellow lighting cast long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. Rusted metal beams stretched overhead, and the air was thick with the smell of old oil and damp wood. Anika stood near the center of the room, her wrists bound in front of her with coarse rope. Her hair was messy, strands sticking to her face, and she had the look of someone who hadn't slept in days, but Sundar's focus was drawn to the men around her. The one closest, a broad-shouldered figure with a scar running from his temple down to his jaw, kept glancing toward the large metal doors at the far end, as if waiting for someone. The others stood in a loose circle, talking in low voices. Sundar counted them quickly. 7 men total. All of them armed, some with guns slung low, others with knives clipped to their belts. They weren't guards. Their stance, their constant scanning of the room, these were professionals. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. That's not them. The men who followed me. They work for someone else. He glanced at her. Someone else? Asterisk, she nodded quickly. The ones who took her that night were different. These guys. I don't know them. But they're the ones keeping her now. Sundar's thoughts spun. If these weren't the same men, that meant Anika had been handed over or traded. Whatever she knew, it was valuable enough for people to pass her between dangerous hands. Asterisk. Inside, the scarred man finally spoke, his voice carrying just enough for them to hear through the cracked side door. The boss will be here in 20 minutes. Make sure she's ready to talk. The phrase made Sundar's stomach twist. Ready. To talk rarely meant a conversation. It meant breaking someone down until they gave up whatever they were holding back. Maya's breathing quickened. We have to get her out before he comes. Maya, Sundar said, keeping his voice low but firm. There are 7 men in there, and they're all armed. If we rush in, we'll be caught before we reach her. We need a plan. Her eyes darted back to her sister. We don't have time for a plan. He crouched beside the crates they were hiding behind, forcing her to meet his eyes. We do, because if we go now and fail, they'll move her, and then you'll never find her again. She swallowed hard, torn between desperation and the cold logic of his words. Look, Sundar continued, we need to create a distraction. Something to pull them away from her long enough for us to get in and get her out. Maya's brow furrowed. Like what? His gaze shifted around the yard outside the warehouse. There were stacks of barrels, some marked with faded warning labels, and a forklift parked near the loading dock. An idea began to form in his mind, dangerous, but maybe their only chance. Before he could explain, movement inside caught his eye. One of the men stepped forward and yanked Anika's chin upward, forcing her to look at him. You got one chance, the man said, his voice hard. Tell us what you heard and maybe you'll walk out of here. Anika's lips moved slowly. I told you, I didn't hear anything. He slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Maya flinched, her nails digging into the wood of the crate they hid behind. Sundar felt anger flare in his chest, hot and sharp. He had to keep himself from charging. And right then, but something about Anika's response caught his attention. There had been a flicker, just a tiny shift in her eyes before she spoke. She was lying. She had heard something, and it was important enough to take a hit for. Mia's voice shook. She's not telling them. She's trying to protect someone. Or something, Sundar said, quietly. What if it's not just about what she overheard? What if she has proof? Mia's eyes widened. Then they'll never let her go. He nodded grimly. Exactly. The scarred man turned to the others. Lock her in the back room. Boss can deal with her when he gets here. 2 men grabbed Anika by the arms, dragging her toward a narrow hallway at the back of the warehouse. She struggled, but her legs were weak, and they half-carried her through the doorway. The heavy door slammed shut with a metallic echo. Maya moved as if to follow, but Sundar held her back. Not yet. We'll lose our chance if they see us now. She shook her head fiercely. I can't just stand here while she's in there. And I can't let you walk into a room full of armed men, he replied. But If we take out the power, it evens the odds. Her eyes narrowed. You know how to do that? He allowed himself the faintest smile. I know enough. There was a power box on the side of the building, half hidden behind stacked pallets. Sundar pointed toward it. When the lights go out, they'll be disoriented. We use that moment to get to her. Maya glanced back toward the warehouse, her jaw tight. Okay. But if anything happens to her, it won't, he said firmly, though inside he wasn't entirely sure. They crept along the side of the building, keeping low and moving from shadow to shadow. The hum of the power lines grew louder as they neared the box. Sundar pulled a multi-tool from his pocket, something he'd carried for years out of habit, and began working quickly. The screws came loose with a faint squeal of metal. The moment he pulled the panel open, the sound of muffled voices inside the warehouse shifted. Someone was moving closer to the side door. Hurry, Maya whispered urgently. Sundar's hands worked faster, finding the main line and twisting. Hard! Sparks leapt, and the warehouse was plunged into sudden darkness. Shouts erupted inside, the confusion immediate. Now, Sundar said. Grabbing Maya's hand, they slipped through the side door, the darkness covering their movement. Inside, the chaos was complete, men shouting to each other, footsteps pounding. Across the floor, flashlights clicking on. Sundar guided Maya toward the back hallway. His eyes had already adjusted enough to see the faint outline of the door where they'd taken Anika. They reached it just as a beam of flashlight light swept dangerously close. Sundar froze, pressing both of them against the wall until it passed. Turn the handle, it was locked. From the other side of the door came a muffled voice, weak but urgent. Maya? Maya's eyes filled with tears. Anika, it's me. We're getting you out. But before Sundar could reply, heavy footsteps thundered toward them down the hallway, and a deep voice said, You shouldn't be here. Asterisk. The voice was deep, steady, and so close it made the hairs on the back of Sundar's neck stand up. He turned slowly, his body instinctively shifting to place himself between Maya and the approaching figure. A beam of light from a flashlight cut through the darkness, stopping just short of blinding them. The man holding it was massive, broad shoulders, thick arms, and the kind of presence that filled the narrow hallway. In the shifting shadows, Sundar could make out a cold, calculated expression on his face. His other hand rested casually on the butt of the gun holstered at his hip. Step away from the door, the man said, his tone almost bored, as if he already knew he was in control. Maya's grip on Sundar's arm tightened painfully, but her voice was fierce. We're not leaving without her. The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes landing on her. Maya, he said slowly, as if tasting the name. So, you're the reason we've had to keep extra eyes on the streets. Something in his voice made Sundar's stomach tighten. They had known she was coming all along. Open the door, Sundar demanded, his voice steady but low. The man chuckled, a humorless sound that seemed to echo off the concrete walls. And why would I do that? You have no idea what you're walking into. This isn't some rescue mission. You're stepping into the middle of something far bigger than you understand. He took a slow step forward, the flashlight beam shifting. Sundar's mind raced. He couldn't let the man get close enough to draw that gun dot in one quick motion. Sundar grabbed a metal rod lying against the wall, a length of old pipe, and swung it hard at the flashlight. The blow knocked it from the man's hand, sending it clattering to the floor and plunging them into deeper darkness. The man lunged forward blindly, but Sundar sidestepped, shoving Maya toward the door. Find the lock. He whispered urgently. Maya fumbled in the dark, her hands searching for the latch while Sundar kept the man occupied. They grappled in the narrow space, the man's strength almost overwhelming. Sundar felt his shoulder slam against the wall, the impact sending a sharp pain down his arm. But he didn't let go of the pipe. Finally, Maya's voice came in a rushed whisper. It's a padlock, I can't. Before she could finish, a muffled voice from inside the room spoke urgently. There's a key on his belt. An IK, a dot. The words made Sundar react instantly. He ducked low, twisting behind the man, and grabbed. For his belt, the man roared, swinging an elbow that barely missed Sundar's head. But Sundar's fingers closed around the cold metal key. Got it, he called, tossing it toward Maya. She caught it by instinct, shoved it into the lock, and twisted hard. The padlock snapped open with a metallic click. The door swung inward, and Anika stumbled out, catching herself on the frame. Even in the dim light, Sundar could see the raw marks on her wrists and the exhaustion etched into her face. But there was no time for relief. The man lunged again, this time grabbing Sundar by the collar and slamming him into the wall. The pipe clattered to the floor, and the man's hand went for his gun. Anika's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and desperate. Stop. If you hurt him, you'll never find it. The man froze, his breathing heavy. Find what? She glanced at Maya, then at Sundar, her eyes filled with urgency. The thing they've been after. I have it. I had it the whole time. Maya's mouth fell open. You didn't tell me? I couldn't, Anika said quickly. It's too dangerous. If they knew, they'd never stop. The man's eyes narrowed, and in that instant, Sundar saw it. The shift in his stance, the calculation in his mind. He was about to make his move. Run, Sundar said, his voice firm. Maya grabbed her sister's hand, and they bolted down the hallway. Sundar shoved the man back, buying a few precious seconds before tearing after them. They emerged into the main warehouse space, the confusion from the blackout still keeping most of the men off balance. Flashlights darted across the dark as shouted orders echoed from one end to the other. This way, Sundar called, steering them toward the side door they'd come through earlier. But just as they reached it, the hum of power returned. Lights flickered back on, flooding the warehouse with harsh yellow light. Every head in the room turned toward them. There, someone shouted. They ran, weaving between stacks of crates and barrels, the sound of boots pounding the concrete behind them. Sundar's mind was laser-focused on the exit. Every second counted. As they neared the fence. A gunshot cracked through the air. The sound was deafening in the open yard, and Maya let out a sharp gasp as a bullet tore into the metal container beside her. Keep moving, Sundar urged, pulling them toward the bent section of fence they had entered through. But when they reached it, they stopped cold. Two of the armed men were already there, blocking the gap. One of them smiled faintly. End of the line. Maya's grip on Anika's hand tightened, but her voice was fierce. You're not getting her back. The man tilted his head, amused. She's not the only one we want anymore. His eyes shifted to Sundar. You've just made yourself very valuable. The words hit Sundar with a chill. They weren't just after Anika. Something about this had just become much bigger and far more dangerous than he had before. Anyone could move. The roar of an engine echoed from the street beyond the fence. Headlights flared through the gaps in the metal, and a black van skidded to a stop. The side door slid open, and a voice shouted, "Get in now." Asterisk, the shouts behind them mixed with the roar of the van's engine, creating a disorienting storm of sound. Sundar's mind moved fast. Whoever was in that van could be their only way out, or the final trap. There was no time to weigh the risk. Go. He shouted, pushing Mia and Anika toward the gap in the fence. The armed men blocking it hesitated, glancing toward the van. The headlights burned into their eyes, forcing them to shield their faces for a split second, just enough for Sundar to act. He grabbed a loose length of chain from the ground and swung it in a wide arc, forcing them to step back. Maya squeezed through the gap first, pulling her sister after her. Sundar was the last through, his heart hammering as he heard the clatter of boots pounding toward them. The van door hung open, a shadowy figure inside waving them forward. Hurry! The voice urged again, urgent but not panicked. Maya and Anika scrambled inside, Sundar right behind them. The door slammed shut just as another gunshot cracked the air. The bullet sparking off the side of the van. The driver floored it, tires screaming against the asphalt. The van surged forward, leaving the warehouse shrinking in the rearview mirror. Inside, the air was heavy with adrenaline, and the scent of engine oil. Maya clung to her sister as if afraid she might vanish again. Anika's breathing was ragged, but her eyes, though tired, were sharp and alert. Sundar looked toward the driver. "Who are you?" The man's eyes flicked to the mirror, catching Sundar's gaze. Someone who's been trying to keep them from getting what they want for a long time. Maya's voice was still shaky. "You knew about us?" The driver nodded. "Knew they'd come for your sister. Knew she'd try to protect it." Anika straightened slightly. "Protect what?" The driver's tone was grim. "The drive, the one in your jacket pocket." Maya's head snapped toward her sister. "You? Have it." Anika reached into the inside lining of her worn jacket and pulled out a small, battered USB drive. Its casing was cracked, but it was clearly intact. This is what they want. It has everything: names, dates, money trails. It proves what they've been doing. And who's involved? Who's involved? Sundar asked. Anaya hesitated. People high up. People who can make others disappear without a trace. She looked at him, her expression haunted. And if they get this back, they'll erase all of it and anyone who knows about it. The driver spoke without taking his eyes off the road. "We're going to a safe house. From there, we get it into the hands of someone who can't be bought." The van weaved through empty industrial streets, heading toward the edge of the city. The night outside was thick and black, broken only by the occasional streetlight. Sundar stayed alert, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Maya leaned closer to him, her voice low. "If they were willing to do all this for a little piece of metal, does that mean they'll still come for us?" He met her gaze. "It means we need to be careful, but it also means we have something they're afraid of." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Good." After nearly 20 minutes of tense silence, the van turned down a narrow lane lined with tall hedges and stopped in front of an old house with no lights on. The driver led them inside quickly, locking the door behind them. The safe house was bare but secure, thick curtains, reinforced doors, a faint smell of dust and wood polish. The driver motioned for them to sit at a small kitchen table. "We won't stay long," he said. "Just enough to transfer the data and send it to the right people. Once it's out there, they can't hide anymore." Anika handed the drive to Sundar, her fingers lingering for a moment. "I've been carrying this since the night they took me. I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to give it to someone I could trust." Sundar nodded slowly. "You can trust me." The transfer began on an old, rugged laptop the driver pulled from a metal case. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, the faint hum of the machine filling the silence. Maya sat beside her sister, never letting go of her hand. Sundar watched them both, the fierce bond between them a quiet reminder of why he'd stepped into this in the first place. But just as the progress bar reached 80%, the sound of an engine rumbled outside. The driver's head snapped up. "They found us." In seconds, Sundar was on his feet, scanning for exits. The driver shoved a pistol into his hand. "Just in case." "I don't want to use it," Sundar said. "Then make sure you don't have to." The driver replied. Shadows moved past the window 3, maybe 4 figures. The front door rattled under a hard knock. N-N-I-K. A single quote's S voice was urgent. "It's almost done. Just a few more seconds." The pounding on the door grew louder, wood splintering. Sundar positioned himself between the sisters and the entrance. Every muscle-tight dot with a final beep, the transfer completed. The driver yanked the USB from the laptop and tossed it to Sundar. "Go back door, down the hill to the water. There's a boat waiting." Maya and Anika didn't hesitate. They followed Sundar through the narrow kitchen and out into the cold night. Behind them, the front door crashed open and shouts filled the house. The hill was steep, the wet grass slick underfoot. The glow of the water below shimmered faintly in the darkness. They slid and stumbled toward the small dock where a lone figure waited by a motorboat. "Get in!" The figure called. Sundar helped the sisters aboard, then climbed in himself. The moment they were seated, the boat's engine roared to life, cutting through the water and leaving the shore behind. As the lights of the city faded into the distance, Maya leaned against her sister, both of them wrapped in the coat Sundar had given her that first night. You didn't have to help us, she said softly. But you did. Sundar looked at them, the night air cold against his face. Sometimes the people you meet by chance are the ones you're meant to help the most. Anika held the drive tightly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. Well, make sure this ends with the truth coming out. Maya smiled faintly, the fear in her eyes finally giving way to something else, hope. And as the boat carried them away into the dark horizon, Sundar knew that whatever dangers still lay ahead, this was a fight worth seeing through to the very end. Asterisk.